That CPD Show.
Welcome back to That CPD Show. My name is Chris and I'll be your host for today. And today, my guest is Mervyn Thomas of CSW. Mervyn founded CSW over 40 years ago and has been engaging parliamentarians, government ministers and church leaders ever since. CSW's team of specialist advocates work in over 20 countries across Africa, Asia, Latin America and the Middle East to ensure that the right of freedom of religion or belief is upheld and protected. CSW's vision is a world free from religious persecution where everyone can practice a religion or belief of their choice. Mervyn, welcome to the show. It's great to have you on.
Thanks, Chris. It's great to be on. Thank you for inviting me.
Brilliant. Well, it's really exciting to talk all about CSW and the work and the mission that you do, and we will dive into all of that. But as anyone who's watched this show or listened to this show indeed will know, is that whilst we do want to talk about the really important topics about freedom of religion and things like that, we also, before we do any of that, we talk about dessert. And it's an important topic, and it's very important, and I ask it to every single guest. So Mervyn, I'm really excited to find out, what is your favourite dessert?
Well, first of all, let me say I'm very excited to answer this question because anybody that's ever had dinner with me anywhere will attest to the fact that whatever else I have, I always have dessert. And, sometimes we go out with the family and say, well, we can't perhaps afford to have 3 courses, so shall we have a starter or a dessert? And the rest of the family always say starter, and so I go along with that. But when we get to the end of the main course, I always have to have the 3rd one. So dessert is really, really important to me. And I really, if you really want me to select one, I would say probably rhubarb crumble and custard, or spotted dick and custard, those kind of jam sponge, syrup sponge, good old-fashioned English desserts.
Yes, absolutely. Well, do you know, so obviously a crumble is very popular. It's a very popular choice on this podcast. But you are the first person to ever say a rhubarb crumble. And do you know what? I, for one, agree with you. I love a rhubarb crumble.
Good. Well, I'm glad. Let's go and have dessert somewhere, shall we?
I think we should. There's something about it. There's a sweetness to it, which is really, really good. My dad, if you speak to Mr. Bright Senior, he is a big fan of rhubarb. Grows it in his garden. So obviously, I've grown up eating rhubarb, and so it's an excellent choice. I must say.
And actually, my son and daughter-in-law have just moved into a house which has got a load of rhubarb grown in it too. So we've just decimated that. And fortunately for us, they don't like rhubarb, so that's fine.
Oh, that is your gain, I think, is the right term there. And custard, always a great choice.
Absolutely. And I don't mind whether it's hot or cold either.
Cold, okay.
I like cold custard, yeah.
Really? So I've never had custard cold. It feels like sacrilege to me. Talk to me about why that's okay. Because so you literally, what do you know? You just take the ambrosia, snip off the end, and then pour it on.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah,
oh,
and I can eat it hot, and I don't mind either whether the crumble is hot or cold.
Okay. So crumble, when you've left it for, it's gone into the fridge after you've had, your first round, and the next day, a little bit when it's cold. It's not bad at all.
No. Can I just stop you there, Chris? Because there's never any left over to put in the fridge.
There we are. You just got to make a big enough crumble.
Absolutely.
So, that's it. And you also said about spotted dick. So I've never had a spotted dick before. What actually is it?
Don't you know what it is? Oh man.
No.
So it's like either these days it tends to be more sponge, but it used to be like a steamed pudding with currants and raisins in.
Okay.
And it's a real old-fashioned English dish, but it's very nice. I'm not sure whether it's good for you or not, but I suppose currants and raisins are okay.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure this segment is all about health.
Good.
Never had that, but obviously love a syrup sponge, and that's always a great, a great dessert. You can have it, ice cream, custard,
Yeah.
both is always very good. So yeah, excellent choices there. Good hearty British desserts there, which I really
Amen.
like. So that's what you need. And actually, the one thing that I found, because I've been able to interview some people from across the pond and also people
Right.
from other areas of the world. And I tell you what, no one does desserts quite like us Brits. So
No,
come on
you're
the
right.
Brits. So
You're right.
yeah, absolutely. Well, brilliant. We are going to move on. We're going to talk about CSW today, and I'd just love for you to be able just to talk about what CSW is, what you do, what's the kind of the heart and the mission and the story of CSW.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Thanks for the opportunity to talk about this. Yeah, I started CSW 46 years ago, actually now, and we started it's we are, first of all, just to say, we're an advocacy organisation, so we don't get involved. I mean, we do little bits of aid, but we don't get involved in aid or in mission in any way. But what we are there for, what we are here for, is to be a voice for those who are unable to speak for themselves. Basically, we started. And I started it with, and some of the older ministers in Assemblies of God will remember John Wildrian, who was the Assemblies of God missions director for many years. John was one of the first people I asked to join our board, but I started it with two members of Parliament, and it was quite interesting. As a Pentecostal, the members of Parliament, one was a Catholic, and the other was at the time was the Grand Master of the World Orange Order from Ulster. So you can gather from that we never talked about theology. Otherwise, CSW wouldn't be in existence today. But sadly, both of those members of Parliament are no longer with us. But we started in response to Christians being persecuted in what was then the Soviet Union, the old Eastern Bloc countries of Europe, Russia, Romania, Bulgaria, Czechoslovakia, those kind of countries. And we used to get our information, and when we started it, we had no paid employee even to start with. We got our information from other sources. The main source was a source called Keston College, which used to have brilliant information on pastors who had been imprisoned in Russia and Romania and places. So we started by campaigning for these individuals who we knew that were in prison. 10 years after that, so that's 1979 we started. 10 years after that, in 1989, communism fell all over Europe, and suddenly those countries were free, and suddenly people were able to worship freely. Some that were in prison were released, and things changed dramatically. But because that was the only region of the world that we had information on, we kind of wondered, well, have we accomplished our mission? Should we pack up and go home? But we looked around the world and we saw there's a lot more persecution going on in the world than there was in Europe. And so we continued, and we spread our wings, and we found other countries where Christians were being persecuted. And but then about another, so that was 1989, 1990, about another 10, 12 years after that, by then we'd got a staff and people were traveling to countries, and one of my staff came back from Burma or Myanmar and said, look, I'm writing this report about Christians being persecuted in Burma, but there's a Muslim group who are just as badly persecuted. What should we do? Should we put this in the report? And I kind of my instinct was, of course we should, but also my pragmatism and practicality was, I wasn't sure how this was going to go down, particularly in the Pentecostal world at the time. Suddenly we're speaking up for Muslims. Will they think that we've become some kind of syncretistic liberal organisation? And let me tell you, Chris, I believe that Jesus Christ is the only way to God the Father. But I also believe that we are all made in the image of God. And God has given us all a free will to choose, and God hates injustice. And so whatever you believe or don't believe, you shouldn't be persecuted for that. And so it did take, I must admit, it took me a while to, for a number of years, we did, when I was in Parliament, when I was in at the United Nations or on Capitol Hill, we would talk about the Rohingya Muslim in Burma, and then other groups as well that weren't Christian. But I didn't really tell our supporters we were doing that for fear of that they wouldn't understand and that the finance tap would be turned off. But eventually, I really got challenged about it. God convicted me about that this was wrong. I was being deceitful. And actually, the guy that I got in to help me look at this from a theological viewpoint was Joel Edwards, the old who was the general director of the EA and many other things. And Joel and I worked through it with our staff, and realised, yes, of course we should be speaking up for people of other faiths. It doesn't mean to say we agree with what they are saying, but the Bible makes it very, very clear. If you go to the Old Testament, it talks a lot about in Leviticus about looking after the foreigner and the alien. And in fact, when Jesus himself was asked, "Who is my neighbour?" he chose a non-Jew. He chose someone that the Jews didn't like. And basically said, everybody's your neighbour, and we need to look after one another. And so yeah, we decided that we needed to be upfront with this. I remember the very first time I ever spoke about this at a church, and it was a New Frontiers church. It was a big church. It was, and I kind of was half expecting flack, and I gave a good 10 minutes in my talk about why we did what we did. And afterwards, you come off the platform and there's a queue of people waiting to see you. And I was thinking, this is not going to go well. But it did. Every single person said, we love it. And I've talked to many Christian leaders, and in fact I sit on the Pentecostal Church's Commission on Religious Liberty, and kind of when I first got involved with that, the leaders were I'm going to be careful how I phrase this, but old school, very old school redneck Pentecostals, all men, and I thought, are they going to get this? But even they got it, and I'm pleased to say I know Assemblies of God in UK gets it. If two people walked into your church and they were hungry, one was a Christian and one was a Muslim, you wouldn't only feed the Christian, would you?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so when we do this, it's what Jesus would do. We do it in the name of Jesus, and it's a very powerful thing to do, and it's missional when we do it, because they ask, why would you speak up for us? Well, the reason we do it is because we are Christians, and that's what Jesus would do.
I love that. Really important, and actually just widening from it. It's not just about Christians helping Christians. It's Christians helping, giving freedom of belief to anyone, regardless, and actually it really demonstrates that the love of Christ to be the love of your neighbor. And I think just so important that when we think about that, because there are persecuted people who are being persecuted for their religious belief across the world, and you think
Absolutely.
about, in China, there's Muslims in China that's certainly being persecuted and things like that. And so I think a really important thing. Now, I was looking on your website, and you talk about the religious freedom as being like a litmus test for whether other rights are at risk of being abused. Talk to me about that litmus test. Why is religious freedom such the litmus test for other rights?
Yeah, it's a great question, and there's no doubt that it is. We sometimes describe it as the canary in the coal mine. But when you think about a lot of other human rights that are enshrined in the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights, the right, for example, the right of the freedom of expression, freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom of association, freedom of movement. All of these things are enshrined in freedom of religion or belief. We as Christians, we want to be free to express ourselves and to speak out. We want to be free to gather together in numbers. And in some countries, that's what frightens. In China, for example, that's what frightens communist governments, that we can gather huge numbers of Christians together. They think we must have some kind of other motive, freedom of movement. All of these things are enshrined. If one of those, or we are enshrined in freedom of religion or belief, that basically. And so we find, for example, in tolerant countries that allow free expression and freedom of assembly and freedom of association, all of those things, we find in those countries that tolerate, they generally tolerate other things too. And so the same with peace and reconciliation. Actually, a lot of people, when I tell people what I do, often, and I'm not talking about necessarily Christians, but others, the response I often get is, yeah, well, religion is the cause of all the problems in the world, isn't it? And Chris, I kind of get why they say that. It seems like that, particularly seems like that to us in the West who are not religious. Sadly, Europe is no longer a Christian nation, a Christian continent. But what we need to remember is that most of the world are religious, and so by taking away their freedom and the freedom that's enshrined in the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights, the freedom of religion or belief is threefold, basically. It's the right to choose your religion, the right to practice your religion, and the right to change your religion. And so if you take away any of those rights, people are going to get angry because it's, we know as Christians, what we believe impacts the way we live. It impacts, in some religions, the way that you invest. It impacts who you marry. All kinds of things are enshrined in that important right of freedom of religion or belief. So we need to turn that narrative round from religion is the cause of all the problems in the world to actually freedom of religion is one of the answers to solutions to all the problems in the world. And let me just add another freedom that is often talked about. You'll often find people talking about freedom of worship. Freedom of worship. And people sometimes talk about it as if it's the be all and end all. It really is a tiny, tiny part of freedom of religion or belief. Freedom of worship. And this became, I tell you who started using it years ago under the Clinton administration in America, Hillary Clinton, when she was Secretary of State. Sorry, that was under Obama. When she was Secretary of State, she used to talk about freedom of worship. And that's kind of, we grab onto that as Christians and think, yeah, that's great. We want freedom of worship. Yeah, but we want far more than freedom of worship. Freedom of worship means that we can come together within these four walls, within our churches. We can sing praises to God, we can listen to sermons, we can hear the word of God expounded, but it doesn't mean that we can go outside and practice that. It doesn't mean that we can, freedom of worship doesn't mean that we can go and evangelize, doesn't mean that we can go into hospitals and schools and do all the kind of things that we do as Christians. So, I just would ask people to beware of that, of freedom of worship being the be all and end all. It's a tiny, tiny part. People in Saudi Arabia would say they've got freedom of worship because they can worship in their own homes. That is not freedom of religion or belief.
Absolutely. It reminds me, because I think freedom of religion is such a actually Christian concept. I was reading Tom Holland's book, Dominion, if you've ever read that.
Yeah, I have, yeah.
And he really makes it very clear that even the concept of religion, to be able to change your religion is such a Christian concept, that there's the religio, there's the cyclum, the secular and the religious. That's something that comes out of Christianity, and so to be able to change your religion is actually a Christianization of the world. Whereas that's just in other areas was just such a foreign, and previously was such a foreign concept. And actually, by bringing that through to other areas, you are actually bringing a very Christian message, which it seems odd, but actually is very much. Being able to say, actually, you are free to choose your own religion and your own belief is really important.
Yeah, no, very important. And actually, Christianity is one of the few religions where, and no religion, and Christians, we don't like it when people turn away from Christianity and become a Muslim or become an atheist or whatever. Of course, we don't like it. But that is, God gave us that right. That's not a right that we can give to ourselves. That was a God-given right. And, often, and it's in my world, it's kind of one of the, often when I get involved in interreligious dialogue, which I have to, it's often one of the elephants in the room. They'll talk about freedom of religion, but so I remember at a Foreign Office conference in Sussex 10 years ago now, I was talking to a professor from Kabul University in Afghanistan, and he was a Muslim, obviously. And I said to him, do you believe in the whole of Article 18? Do you believe in yeah, of course I believe it. So I said, do you believe in the right to change your religion? And he said, yes. And I knew that he wasn't telling me the truth. But so as I drilled down, what he meant, and what Muslims so often mean in my world is, we believe everybody should have the right to change their religion to Islam. But moving from Islam to another religion is apostasy, and in many countries that's punishable by death. So there's a big hurdle to overcome, but it is, as you quite rightly say, it's a God-given right. It's a Christian right, and when we, I just go back to say, when we do speak up for people of other faiths, that is missional. I remember one of our staff went to visit an atheist in prison in Indonesia a number of years ago, and he was in prison because he was an atheist, because he turned away from Islam. And when my colleague went in to see him in his prison cell, he gave him his card, and the guy looked at him and said, "Oh dear, I'm really sorry. I think you probably wasted your time. Didn't they tell you I'm an atheist?" And he said, "Well, yeah." He said, "Well, you're from Christian Solidarity." So he said, "Well, yeah, but that's why I'm here, because I'm a Christian. I'm here because we think it's unjust that you're locked up for this." And so it was a real missional thing. And yeah, it's really, really important that we do speak up against all injustice. And that means sometimes we speak up for Christians, but you quite rightly identified the Uyghur Muslims in China, the Yazidis in Iraq, Hindu girls in Pakistan who are trafficked. We need to be a voice for them.
Absolutely. Are there any other sort of urgent hotspots at the moment that you're spotting, that you're seeing around, that maybe we need to pray about, speak up about? What are you seeing?
Yeah. How long have you got, Chris? This is we focus at CSW on about 30 countries. We could focus on 60. But I guess that the countries that most concern me at the moment Nigeria would be one. Nigeria and India are two countries that have the most, according to the Pew Foundation, which does statistics on these things. India and Nigeria have the highest incidence of violence. So this is societal violence against religious minorities. In India, that's against Christians and Muslims, and also Sikhs to a degree. In Nigeria, it's mainly Muslims on Christians. But we get in India, we get incidents, I would say, on a daily basis of attacks on churches or attacks on Muslim villages, sometimes resulting in death. Horrendous incidents, and Nigeria is the same. So, and the solution to them is well, in India, one of the main issues is that that Hindus or kind of very fundamental Hindus feel that they are being good Indian citizens when they attack people of other faiths, simply because the BJP and Prime Minister Modi would well, they are a Hindu nationalist party, and so they feel that they're doing good when they attack Christians and Muslims, and particularly they feel they're doing good because nobody ever brings them to book over this. So it's rare that anybody ever gets charged when they attack religious minorities. But countries like ourselves and many countries in the world, and this is similar to China too, that we all want to do business with India. It's a big economy, and so to go to India and kind of put a spoke in the wheel of trade negotiations because you're talking about their treatment of religious minorities is not always something that governments want to do, and that's the same in China with a huge economy. In Nigeria, one of the problems is that both the UK government and the US government won't face up to the fact that the violence in Nigeria is basically religious violence. Those people who don't know, basically half of Nigeria, about 50% Nigeria are Christian, 50% Muslim. Most of the Muslims live in the north, most of the Christians in the south. There's the middle belt where there's a real mixture, where there's a lot of the problems, but also in the north where the church is really strong, but very much a minority. And attacks on villages, and I've been to some of these villages and seen what's happened, which is horrific. Killings going on in these villages on a reasonably regular basis from 3 terror groups that are operating, Islamic terror groups operating in the north. But our government and also the US government see it as, they just call it communal violence. It's just it's got nothing to do with faith. But when you've got 50 motors, and we've had lots of incidents, 50 motorcycles with 3 people on, 1 driving and one on each, 2 on the back, with pointing AK-47s in opposite directions, going through the village and shouting Allahu Akbar. Of course, that's religious, and so until we face it, and they also blame it on climate change because a lot of the herders are having to move around. And there's some truth. It isn't simple, but the fact is, until we recognise that the main motivator is religion, we're not going to solve the problem. And so Nigeria, India, 2 of the countries that I'm most concerned about. The other country in Africa, and we could name, Sudan is also a huge problem. Eritrea, where you've got many pastors in prison. Some have been, in fact, there's 7 Pentecostal pastors that were imprisoned in 2002 and are still in prison. And Eritrea is often described as the North Korea of Africa. Really bad in that country. And then you've got Mexico and Cuba, and Nicaragua, more and more of a problem. Pakistan, where the blasphemy laws are, where many people are imprisoned because they've been considered to have committed blasphemy, and also where Hindu and Christian girls are taken and forcibly converted and married off. So I could go on, Syria is a country where we've just been working in Syria, actually bringing together some of the different faith groups. What we found out as we've gone in after the fall of oh dear, I can't remember the. Oh my goodness! Yeah, you know what I'm talking about. After the fall of the regime, we've gone in there and found that actually all of the different religious groups have not got relationship with one another. So there's nobody's talking, and religion is a huge part of what's happening there. So what we're doing, and we've just had the first one, we've brought together the religious leaders for a retreat for a few days, so they build relationship with one another, so when problems come they can begin to understand and support one another. And we're going to do a number of those in the country. So different countries have different problems, and of course China and North Korea. North Korea is horrific, and I think that's quite well known. And China, not just for Christians, but for those Uyghur Muslims, maybe up to 3 million of them in re-education camps. So there's a lot to do, Chris.
Yeah, I wonder how effective are political solutions, you know, the UN and things like that. I know that obviously you're involved in advocacy, so when you hear these stories and you think, well, gosh, you know, who is there to kind of help make that better, and is there a political solution to that? So talk to me about that from your experience.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. And you know, if you'd have been talking to me 46 years ago when I set up CSW, I'd have said there's no awareness. And politically, people either didn't know or didn't care. That is changing, and a lot of that has been driven from America originally. So in 1985, I took 3 American congressmen to Romania. Romania at the time was under the control of Nicolae Ceausescu, who was the kind of Kim Jong-un of his day, a despotic dictator. And I went there with the 3 congressmen. It was a very eye-opening trip for all 3 of us. One of those congressmen, well, one of them is still a congressman, actually. He's the longest serving congressman, Chris Smith. But one of them, Frank Wolf, who has become the leading voice for religious freedom or freedom of religion or belief in the US. He authored something called the 1998 International Religious Freedom Act, which set up in America an independent commission on religious freedom, which funded by Congress and reported to Congress, plus a State Department Office of International Religious Freedom that reported to the President, plus an ambassador at large for religious freedom. And since 1998, all 3 of those have carried forward, and they've driven a lot of what's happening in the world. And they were particularly turbocharged actually during the first Trump administration, where the ambassador at large was a guy called Sam Brownback, who'd been a congressman, a governor. He was governor of Kansas for many years, and also a senator. But anyway, he really kind of turbocharged this movement. And now many countries, including our own, have an ambassador for freedom of religion or belief. In the UK, it's called an envoy. Under the Conservative government, it was Fiona Bruce, the MP for Congleton. Sadly, she lost her seat, and so is no longer the envoy. But we have got an envoy, David Smith, who's a Christian, MP for Northumberland, is doing a great job. He's just getting to grips with the job, which he was only appointed just before Christmas last year. But also, there are so you've got governments, and now a lot of those governments that have appointed envoys have come together in something called the Article 18 Alliance, which is 42 countries at government level that meet together regularly, and they have a council of experts, which I sit on, and so from civil society, you are telling them what's happening in the world and wanting these governments to come up with solutions. You've got the International Panel of Parliamentarians for Freedom of Religion or Belief. You've got many countries now have got civil society groups. In the UK, we call it the UK Forum, which I chair, and that's 90 civil society organisations of all faiths and none working together towards freedom of religion or belief. And so there is more, and I'll come to the UN in a second, but there's more political awareness of freedom of religion or belief than there's ever been in my lifetime. And so that's a great thing. In the UK Parliament, we've got a all-party parliamentary group. That's people from all different parties, from both houses. I don't know, it has to be after a general election that committee sort of falls and you have to new one. But at the end of the last parliament, there were 170 members of that all-party parliamentary group. So it's staggeringly, the awareness is greater than it's ever been, but the problem is as bad as it's ever been. But I have hope in that we've got, with the political awareness, we've got groups of people who are saying, including governments and parliamentarians, who are saying we're going to make a change to this. So that's good. With regard to the UN, CSW has got status at the UN. We've got ECOSOC status. It took us about 15 years to get, and that's a story for another time. It took a very long while, and mainly because the committee that grants membership is made up of all the countries that persecute Christians. So, but we have got status, and that enables us at the United Nations. Each country, every 4 or 5 years, has to submit itself to what's called a universal periodic review of its human rights. This is at the Human Rights Council in Geneva. And so we feed into those, to all the countries where we focus on, we feed into their universal periodic review. And, it has resulted in some cases of countries changing the way that they operate and changing their laws or changing the way they treat their citizens. The UN isn't perfect, but in a way, it's kind of all we've got that involves the whole world. And we need to use that, and we need to, and if you go to far off places, you visit countries where Christians and others are persecuted, and you tell them that you're going to raise their case at the United Nations, it really gives them hope. There's a lot of awareness, and we need to use those. We need to use those places of influence in order to get our point across about religious freedom.
Absolutely. I would like to sort of bring it into the kind of the local church level now, because I think it's an interesting point, and we're recording this in the end of September 2025, and there's this interesting moment where we're at where the church and politics have there's this interaction where it feels like we need to think about what is the church's involvement in politics? What is our involvement in what we should say, what we shouldn't say? So what would you say to ministers that maybe have never thought about the political side of speaking up for the marginalized, and getting involved in the political sphere? What would you say to those ministers on that, about maybe about the importance about speaking up as churches and speaking up for beliefs? What's the best way to approach that as a minister?
It's a really, really good question, and I actually wrote an article for the Assemblies of God magazine in 1976, telling people that we need Pentecostal politicians. It didn't go down brilliantly well, to be honest with you. The political world is a dirty world, and we shouldn't be involved in that. But of course we should. But that doesn't mean to say that everybody needs to be necessarily. And let me unpack that a bit, because actually I spoke at the Pentecostal World Conference in Helsinki this year on this very subject. I had a seminar, and it was I sat on a panel with the First Lady of Kenya and the leader of the Democratic Christian Party in Finland, and we but just as and it was about Christian involvement in the political world. I can't remember what the actual title was, but the funny thing was, just as I was going to my seminar, I popped my head into the main arena where Rick Warren was speaking. Just simply as I popped my head in, he said these words: "Was Jesus involved in politics? No, he wasn't. We need to steer clear of it." And I thought, oh well, and I'm just about to do a seminar saying the opposite. I understand why he said what he said, because in America we are seeing things that, in my view, I'm not particularly happy about particularly about taking very strong political sides in things. But we do need to be, we do need to recognise that Christians, just like anybody else, have different views. That's why I've never been for a Christian political party. There was a Christian political party in the past, but we disagree on policy issues, and that's fine and that's healthy. But what we do need to be is salt and light, and that's what Jesus told us we needed to be. And you can't, salt in particular is only effective if it's mingled. Okay, so salt in the salt cellar is useless. Salt in a sack by the side of the road will never melt any ice. And so, we need to get in there, and we do need to have our voice heard. We have to be careful about how we do that. But the one thing that I would say, more than if just for ordinary church pastors, is this: just do build a relationship with your member of parliament, okay? And that doesn't have to be anything to do with politics. I always urge pastors, go and see your member of parliament, go to one of their surgeries. Don't go to complain about something, not the first time anyway. Just go and say, look, I just want to tell you about my church. We meet on Sundays, blah, blah, blah. This is what we do in the community. This is the work we do. This is what we believe. We'd love to invite you to a service. But also always say to them, how can we pray for you? And even if they're not Christians, even if they're atheists or Muslims or other faiths, my experience has been, and I've prayed, Chris, I've prayed with hundreds of members of parliament over the years that I've been involved in this, and I can tell you that even people who are non-believers or have a different faith, they always appreciate you asking how you can pray for them. And they might, how can I pray for your family? And so that's it's an easy way to build relationship. And these people, very often, they're quite lonely, members of parliament. It's a tough life. I know they don't get a very good, write-up very often, but they work very hard, and so we can be an influence in that way. But we can also, we can, if we feel, I do believe it's a calling, and there are many more evangelical, spirit-filled Christians in and around Parliament than there's ever been in my lifetime, which is great because they've been called. But I don't think everybody necessarily needs to speak out with a political voice. If you use social media, you can put things on there. You just need to be very careful that in the views that we espouse. I guess they need to be done with decency and with tolerance and all of those kind of things. But it is important that we are salt and light.
Absolutely. I think the calling of the sort of the Daniel calling is the ability to be very wise in a political sphere, and but building with those people locally, then, and having influence, but having that wisdom is a really important thing. That really came through really strong for me. Just as a final thing, how can we pray for CSW, and maybe how can churches partner with you as well in what you're doing around the world?
Yeah, great. Thank you. Question. We would love to be involved with more churches in Assemblies of God, and more churches generally. So how you can do that? Well, first of all, when it comes to prayer and also action, because we often ask our supporters to write letters to their member of parliament, or to and we make it very easy for them. We will give them a template, etc. But we send out, when it comes to prayer, we send out a prayer email every Saturday morning. It comes out, and the reason it comes out on Saturday morning is so that people can take those prayer requests that we put in there to their churches on Sunday to get people to pray. And prayer is, I can't stress how important prayer is. Some churches have a regular persecuted church prayer meeting every month or so. Sometimes they write letters. We have a resource called Connect and Encourage, which basically is an address book where people can send letters and cards to those in prison and human rights defenders. But partnering with us, we would love to come and speak at your church. And I personally speak in a lot of churches, but we've got a team of people that come out and speak. Come and, what I find when I do speak in churches is that the most common thing the two most common questions I get, or statements I get, is one is, what about the persecution here in the UK? And let me tell you, there is no persecution in the UK. I know there are things that we should be concerned about. There is more and more discrimination, but it's not persecution. We live in a very free country, and we need to make that very, very clear. But the other statement I always get is, we had no idea this was going on in the world. And if we've got no idea, we'll do nothing about it. So, it's really important we come and speak at your churches to give you the picture, not just of what's happening, but what we can do about it.
Yeah, brilliant, great. And do you have an email address, or what's your website, so we can send people there as well?
Website is csw.org.uk. There's you'll find country profiles of all the countries that we focus on, of what's happening in those countries. If people want to contact me directly to invite me, my email address is Mervyn Thomas at csw.org.uk. But please go onto the website and please look and see what you can do. This is Proverbs 31 tells us that we're to speak up for those unable to speak for themselves. That's what we do at CSW, and that's what we would love pastors and churches to do with us.
Brilliant. Mervyn, I've really enjoyed this conversation. I think it's come at such a pivotal, important time in the life of the church worldwide as well, and in the UK. So thank you for the work that you do, and looking forward to maybe let's do a podcast again soon, and we'll talk about more dessert or something like that. So that sounds
Amen. Yes. As long as we can try some of them, we can have a tasting session.
That's good. Maybe what we'll do is we'll do a podcast in a some kind of dessert establishments. We can do that. I'm up for that.
You're on, Chris.
Perfect. Thanks so much. Take care, and I'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of That CPD Show. For more episodes, why not subscribe and give us a review? It really helps us out. See you next time.